I stood there, numb, staring at the small casket being lowered into the ground. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides, fingernails digging so hard into my palms I was surprised I wasn't bleeding. The priest's voice droned on, words meant to bring comfort to the grieving, but they barely registered. The only sound that mattered was the silence where my son's laughter used to be. Lucas should have been here, clutching my leg, grinning up at me with his gap-toothed smile. Instead, I was burying him. The air was thick, the sky a mocking shade of blue, the sun shining too brightly for such a dark day. Around me, friends and family wept, their shoulders shaking, their hands dabbing at their eyes. My mother clutched my arm, her fingers trembling against my sleeve, but I barely felt her touch. My world had shattered into a million jagged pieces the moment Lucas took his last breath, and yet the pain of losing him wasn't the only thing suffocating me. Julia wasn't here. Not because she was too devastated to stand by my side, not because grief had swallowed her whole. No, Julia was in Miami. With him. With Mark. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and with a sick sense of inevitability, I pulled it out. The message glowed on the screen, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at the words, disbelief turning to something ice-cold in my veins. Sorry, important business meeting. I'll call you later. Business meeting. That's what she called it. While I was standing over the grave of our only child, she was hundreds of miles away, probably draped over him in some overpriced hotel suite, sipping champagne and laughing at something he said. The worst part? She thought I was clueless. She thought she had me wrapped around her perfectly manicured finger, believed she could keep feeding me lies and that I'd keep swallowing them. That I'd never question the conveniently timed business trips, the last-minute cancellations, the late-night calls she always took in another room. She had no idea that I knew everything. I knew about the secret weekend getaways, the expensive gifts Mark showered her with, the whispered conversations that stopped the second I entered the room. I knew where she was, what she was doing, and who she was doing it with. And she had no idea what was coming next. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, my fingers trembling from the sheer force of the rage coursing through me. But no one could see it. No one could sense the storm brewing inside me. On the outside, I was the grieving father, the heartbroken husband abandoned in his darkest hour. I let them see my pain, my devastation, but not the fire simmering just beneath the surface. As the final shovelful of dirt hit the coffin, a dull thud against the wood, something inside me shifted. Lucas was gone. Gone because of a freak accident, a moment of chaos that stole him from me before I could even say goodbye. And yet, Julia had chosen to be gone. She had made the decision to abandon her own son's funeral, to slip away under the guise of business. Business. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I turned, my eyes scanning the sea of mourners. I caught glimpses of pity, of sorrow. Some averted their gazes, unable to hold my stare, as if my grief was too much for them. Others lingered, offering hesitant touches, murmured condolences that meant nothing. My mother pulled me into a tight hug. "Oliver, honey, you don't have to go through this alone." I knew what she meant. She was worried about me, worried about the way Julia wasn't here, the way she hadn't been here for weeks, even before today. I gave her a stiff nod. I know. I knew exactly how alone I was. The priest finished his final prayer, and one by one, people began to drift away. Some stopped to shake my hand, offer hollow words of comfort. I barely heard them. I kept my responses short, measured, polite. Because soon, very soon, I would have no need for politeness. A hand clasped my shoulder firm, grounding. I turned to see my best friend, Ryan, standing there, his face etched with something between sorrow and anger. "She's in Miami, isn't she?" he muttered. I didn't react. I didn't need to. Ryan knew the answer. He'd known something was off for months. I exhaled slowly. "Yeah." Ryan's jaw tightened. "She's a monster, man." I didn't disagree. But calling her a monster wasn't enough. Saying the words out loud didn't change what she'd done, what she was doing. Julia wasn't just a selfish woman who had made a mistake. She was calculated, cold. She had stood in our home, looked me in the eyes, and lied. She had kissed our son goodnight, knowing she would rather be somewhere else. She had chosen a lover over her own flesh and blood. My phone buzzed again. I didn't even need to look. I knew what it would say. Another excuse, another pathetic attempt to justify her absence. Ryan leaned in. What are you going to do? I turned to him, the edges of my vision dark with purpose. I'm going to let her dig her own grave. I drove home in complete silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The weight of the day pressed down on me like a boulder, but beneath the suffocating grief, something darker churned. A quiet, calculated rage that had been building for months. Julia thought she was untouchable. She thought she could spin whatever narrative she wanted, bend reality to fit her needs like she did in her PR work. But this wasn't some corporate scandal she could bury with well-placed headlines and media spin. This was real life. My life. Lucas's life. And she had burned it all to the ground. I pulled into the driveway of our house, my house now. The place felt hollow without Lucas, without the echoes of his laughter bouncing off the walls. I stepped inside, pausing just long enough to take in the eerie stillness before heading straight to my office. The screens on my desk lit up as I sat down, logging in with the same precision I used at work. Julia had always assumed I was too preoccupied with my job to notice anything else. What she didn't realize was that my job had made me very, very good at watching, at tracking, at analyzing patterns and behavior. I opened a secure folder on my computer. Inside was everything I had on Julia's affair. GPS locations, credit card statements, hotel reservations. I had timestamps, phone records, even security footage from the airport showing her boarding a flight to Miami when she was supposedly working late. She thought she was clever, thought she could control the narrative. She had no idea I had been quietly building the truth behind her back. A live GPS tracker blinked on the screen, showing me exactly where she was at that very moment, the Mandarin Oriental, Miami. A 5-star hotel, of course. Nothing but the best for Julia and her business meetings. I clicked through to her room number, cross-referencing the reservation. Mark had booked the suite under his name, but Julia had used our joint credit card for the spa services. Arrogant. Careless. She thought she was in control. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Every piece of evidence I had collected could destroy her if I wanted it to. And I did. But not yet. Julia was a strategist in her own way, always 3 steps ahead in her career, manipulating clients, spinning stories. She had underestimated me because I had always played the quiet, patient husband, the one who let things go. But now? Now, I was the one 3 steps ahead. I tapped my fingers against the desk, my mind racing through every possible move. Divorce would be the easy route. Serve her papers, expose her, let the world see what kind of woman she really was. But that wasn't enough. Julia needed to feel it. She needed to experience what true loss felt like. I clicked on another folder, one filled with financial statements. Julia was about to learn what it felt like to lose everything. I barely slept that night. I didn't need to. Every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was Lucas, his little hands reaching for me, his sleepy voice asking me to read him one more bedtime story. And then, the crushing reality that I would never hear his voice again. And Julia? She was sprawled out in a 5-star suite in Miami with her lover, blissfully unaware that her entire world was about to come crashing down. By sunrise, I was already at my desk, coffee untouched, eyes locked on the screens in front of me. The plan was forming, every piece falling perfectly into place. First, her career. Julia thrived on status. Her job wasn't just a paycheck, it was her lifeline, her identity. She built her reputation on being untouchable, scandal-free, the woman who could fix any PR disaster. What would happen when she became the scandal? I opened my email, scrolling to the draft I had written days ago. A little insurance policy. It contained every piece of dirt I had on her and Mark, timestamped receipts, screenshots of their messages, flight details, and a particularly damning recording of Julia bragging to a friend about how she had Oliver wrapped around her finger. The recipient? One of her biggest clients. A politician with a zero-tolerance policy for bad press. If this email hit his inbox, Julia's career would go up in flames. I hovered over the send button. Not yet. I wasn't finished with her. Next, her money. She always treated my salary like an afterthought, assuming we would always have more, that I would always provide. What she never realized was that I had quietly been making moves behind the scenes. Our joint accounts? Already emptied and transferred into a private trust. Her personal savings? Frozen, thanks to a financial investigation I'd tipped off. Her business investments? Legally tied up in ways she wouldn't untangle for months. By the time she realized what was happening, she would be penniless. I checked the GPS tracker again. Still in Miami. Still completely oblivious. That's when I made the call. Ryan picked up on the first ring. Tell me it's time. I smiled, the first real smile I'd had in weeks. It's time. Ryan had been waiting for this moment as much as I had. He had seen me break, had watched Julia destroy everything that mattered, and he knew exactly what I needed from him. I'll take care of it, he said. She won't see it coming. I leaned back in my chair, breathing in deeply. Julia had no idea what was waiting for her when she got home. She had betrayed me. She had abandoned our son. And now? She was about to lose everything. The flight from Miami landed at 7:45 p.m. I knew because I was watching. Julia thought she was coming home to the same life she had always known. She thought she could waltz back through our front door, flash that fake look of sympathy, maybe squeeze out a few crocodile tears and say something rehearsed like, "I just needed to clear my head, Oliver." I was grieving in my own way. I almost laughed at the thought. She had no idea. The house was dark when she pulled into the driveway. I watched from my office window as she stepped out of her car, smoothing down her dress, adjusting her hair. Even now, even after everything, she cared about how she looked. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she walked up to the front door. She reached for the handle and froze. She tried again, jiggling the knob, but the door wouldn't budge. I had changed the locks. I saw her expression shift, confusion flickering into irritation. She pulled out her phone, no doubt about to text me. I beat her to it. I sent one single message. Your things are in the garage. I watched as she stiffened, her eyes scanning the windows like she could somehow see me watching her from the shadows. Then, without another second of hesitation, she spun on her heel and marched toward the garage. She hit the keypad. The door groaned as it lifted, revealing exactly what I wanted her to see. Every single thing she owned, stacked in boxes, waiting for her like discarded luggage. Her designer clothes, her jewelry, her precious work laptop. Everything that tied her to this house, this life, gone. Her phone lit up again. By the way, your cards don't work anymore. You might want to figure something out. I wish I could have seen her face in that moment. The realization sinking in, the panic creeping up her spine as she tried to make sense of it all. She turned away from the garage, storming back toward the front of the house, hitting my number. I let it ring. And then, just as she reached the porch again, I opened the door. She stopped dead in her tracks. For the first time in our entire marriage, she looked truly afraid of me. Oliver, she breathed. Her voice edged with something between desperation and disbelief. What the hell is going on? I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and gave her a slow, measured look. Your flight back from Miami was smooth, I assume? Her face drained of color. She knew. I tilted my head slightly. Oh, no excuses? No fake tears? No, it's not what it looks like, baby. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I smiled. That's what I thought. The door slammed shut in her face. The second the door slammed, I heard it, the sharp intake of her breath. The panic finally setting in. I didn't move. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what she was about to do next. A second later, the buzzing started. My phone. Over and over, the screen lit up with her name. I let it ring. Then came the texts. Julia, Oliver. Open the door. We need to talk. Julia, this isn't funny. Let me in. Julia, my keys don't work. WTF is going on? Julia, Oliver, I swear to God. I turned my phone on silent and set it down on the counter. Let her panic. Let her feel what it's like to be discarded. Through the peephole, I watched her stand there, her fingers tightening around her phone like she wanted to crush it. Her breathing had turned shallow, quick. She was spiraling. Good. Finally, she tried calling someone else. Mark. I almost laughed. Of course she did. That was her pattern, wasn't it? She always had a backup. A contingency plan. Too bad I had gotten to him first. I watched as she pressed the phone to her ear, waiting for him to pick up. He wouldn't. See, earlier today, while she was still blissfully unaware in Miami, I had sent Mark's wife. Yes, his wife. Every single piece of evidence I had on their affair. Every receipt. Every text. Every intimate photo Julia thought was private. And guess what? Mark's wife was not a woman to be trifled with. I had it on good authority that Mark was currently occupied with a very expensive divorce attorney and had far bigger problems than Julia banging on my door. The moment her call went to voicemail, I saw the shift in her posture, a crack in her confidence. Good. Now she was starting to understand. There was no backup plan, no safety net, no one coming to save her. She was alone. A few minutes passed before she tried again. Softer this time. Julia, Oliver, please. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I love you. I exhaled slowly, rolling my shoulders back. Love. What a joke. I swung the door open, leaning casually against the frame. Her eyes darted up, relief flashing across her face for half a second before she registered the look on mine. Cold. Unmoved. Completely uninterested in whatever performance she was about to put on. You love me. I repeated, arching a brow. She swallowed hard, nodding. Yes, of course I do. I held up a hand. Save it. Her mouth snapped shut. For the first time in our marriage, she had no control over the situation. She tried again, her voice trembling. Oliver, listen. I was just confused, okay? I made a mistake. But it didn't mean anything. I never stopped loving you. I tilted my head. Did it not mean anything when you left me to bury our son alone? She flinched. I stepped forward, closing the space between us until I could see the sheer terror in her eyes. Did it not mean anything when you booked a luxury suite with Mark while I was picking out a coffin for our 5-year-old? My voice was quiet, deadly calm. Tears welled up in her eyes. Fake. Manipulative. She reached for me. I stepped back. Her hands trembled. Oliver. I was going to come back. I let out a low chuckle, shaking my head. You're already gone, Julia. She stared at me, uncomprehending. I gestured toward the garage. Your things are packed. Your accounts are frozen. Your career is, I gave a small shrug. Let's just say, not in great shape right now. Her breath hitched. What are you talking about? I let the moment hang between us. Let her feel the weight of it. Then I leaned in just enough for her to hear me when I whispered, check your email. And with that, I shut the door again. I didn't have to look through the peephole to know what was happening on the other side of that door. I could hear it. The panic tapping of her fingers on her phone, the rapid breathing as she opened her inbox, the sharp inhale as the email loaded. Then silence. I waited, savoring the moment, letting it sink in. Julia had spent her whole career controlling narratives, spinning the truth, crafting perfect images for people desperate to maintain their reputations. Now she was the scandal. In the email, neatly packaged for maximum devastation, was everything. Screenshots of her text with Mark, every lie, every betrayal, every degrading thing she had ever said about me. Receipts from luxury hotels, first-class flights, spa treatments, all charged to our joint account. GPS logs of every time she snuck away when she was supposed to be working late. But the best part? The recipients. Not just her. Her clients. Her biggest contracts. The elite businessmen and politicians who hired her because she was seen as discreet, as someone who protected reputations. Now, she was the liability. Her name was already turning into a cautionary tale. Another sharp inhale. And then, finally, the scream. It started as a strangled gasp, then built into a guttural, raw sound of pure horror. No, 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 no. Oh my God, what did you do? I let myself smile. She was ruined. I leaned against the counter, listening as she frantically dialed numbers, probably trying to salvage the mess. But there was no fixing this. By the time she realized that her business accounts had been frozen, that her name was already circulating in PR circles as too risky to work with, it was over. I checked the security camera feed. Julia stood in the middle of the porch, gripping her phone with shaking hands, her face a twisted mask of rage and desperation. She turned toward the door and pounded on it. Oliver, let me in. We can fix this. Please. I picked up my phone, scrolled through my messages, and hit send. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down, chest heaving. Me, find somewhere else to sleep. You don't live here anymore. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with fury. She looked feral, like a predator who just realized she had been outplayed. You think this is over? She shrieked. I calmly typed another message. Me, it is for me. Then I shut off the lights. Let her scream into the night. She was finally feeling what I had felt for months. Abandoned. Alone. Powerless. The sound of her fists slamming against the door faded into the night. At first, she pounded in pure rage, shrieking my name, demanding I let her in, demanding I explain myself like I owed her something. But after a while, the pounding slowed, became weaker. The screams turned to desperate pleas. I sat in the dark, watching the security feed on my phone. Julia stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, shaking. She kept looking at her phone, scrolling, searching, probably for anyone who would answer her calls. She had no one left. Mark wasn't responding. I knew that already. His wife had seen to that. She had filed for divorce within hours of receiving my little package of truth. Mark's accounts were locked up, his assets being scrutinized, and from what I'd heard, he had a lot more to lose than Julia. Julia tried Ryan next. I almost laughed at that one. She didn't know Ryan had been waiting for this moment longer than I had. The call rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail. Her breathing hitched. I could feel her breaking. A woman like Julia, someone who thrived on control, on manipulation, she had never been truly powerless before. She turned, staring at the street, at the cold, empty silence of the night. She had nowhere to go. Her car was in the driveway, but she knew her credit cards wouldn't work. She had no money, no hotel to run to, no lover's arms waiting to comfort her. This was rock bottom, and I wanted her to sit in it, drown in it. Finally, after minutes of pure stillness, she did something I didn't expect. She slumped down onto the porch, pulled her knees to her chest, started crying. Real tears? Maybe, but it didn't matter. They were too late. I let her sit there for a long time, let her feel the weight of everything she had destroyed. Then, just as she started pulling herself together, I sent the final nail in her coffin. Me, check the news. She blinked, sniffled, and pulled up her browser. And then, I saw the exact moment it hit her. Her face twisted in horror. Her mouth fell open. She clutched her phone like she wanted to crush it in her hands. Because there it was. The headline. Top PR executive Julia Carter caught in scandal. Leaked affair exposes infidelity and fraud. Her name. Her reputation. Everything she had built shattered. I watched her completely fall apart. Her head fell into her hands. Her shoulders shook. She was ruined, and she knew it. After a while, she lifted her face toward the door, her eyes hollow, lost. And for the first time since she walked out on me and our son, I saw it, fear. Not of me. Of the future she had just destroyed with her own hands. I let her sit with that. Let her truly understand the depth of what she had done. Then, finally, I turned off the camera feed. Julia was nothing to me now. She was just a woman crying alone in the dark. The morning came cold and quiet. The house felt lighter, freer, like it had exhaled all the rot that had been festering inside it for months. I stood by the window with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the sun bleed across the horizon. Julia was gone. At some point during the night, after the sobbing had stopped, after reality had finished crushing whatever delusions she had left, she must have picked herself up and walked away. Where? I didn't know. I didn't care. What mattered was that she wasn't here. I sat down at my desk, pulling up my emails. The headline was everywhere now, spreading like wildfire through corporate circles, a scandal too juicy to ignore. Julia's downfall was playing out in real time, and I didn't have to lift a single finger anymore. The machine had already been set in motion. My phone buzzed. Ryan. I answered on the second ring. She's finished, he said, without even a hello. I smirked. I know. He let out a low chuckle. Mark's wife isn't done with him, either. I heard she's taking him for everything he's worth. Good. Let them tear each other apart. Let them both experience what it felt like to lose everything. What about Julia? Ryan asked. I took a sip of coffee. She has nothing left. A beat of silence. Then, and how do you feel about that? I glanced around the house. The house that no longer carried the stench of her lies. The house that was finally mine again. Lighter. Stronger. Whole. I feel, I said, exhaling slowly, like I can finally breathe again. Ryan didn't push for more. He knew. He had seen me at my worst. Seen the way Julia had eroded me, piece by piece, until I was just a man holding everything together with shaking hands. But now? Now, I was free. I'll see you later, I told him. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair. I was drifting over to the only photo I had left of Lucas. His wide, goofy grin, his tiny hand smudging the glass from the last time he had touched it. I reached out, ran my thumb over the frame. This was for you, buddy. And with that, I turned away from the past and stepped into the future. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks without Julia, without her lies poisoning the air, without the weight of her betrayal hanging over my shoulders. And in those 2 weeks, I watched from a distance as her world collapsed. Her job? Gone. The clients who once fought for her attention had cut ties overnight, distancing themselves from the walking PR disaster she had become. No high-profile firm would touch her now. Her own scandal was the kind of mess she used to clean up, and no one wanted the stain of it on their reputation. Her finances? Frozen, ruined, and dwindling fast. Without access to our accounts, without my salary padding her lifestyle, she was running out of options. I knew this because I had made sure she had nothing left to drain. And Mark? Long gone. Last I heard, he was fighting a brutal divorce battle, bleeding money to keep his ex from taking him to the cleaners. And Julia? She was nothing more than collateral damage. The moment she became a liability, Mark dumped her. I thought that would be enough. But then, she made a mistake. She came back. It was a Friday evening, late, when I heard the knock. Not banging, not desperate fists against the door, just 1, 2 soft knocks. Hesitant. I didn't open it right away. I didn't need to. I knew who it was. I checked the security feed, and there she was, Julia. She looked like hell. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smudged, the once impeccable designer coat she used to flaunt now wrinkled, clinging to her thin frame. She looked smaller, defeated. I let her wait. She shifted on her feet, rubbing her arms, glancing over her shoulder like she was afraid someone would see her. Finally, after a full 5 minutes, I opened the door. She looked up at me, and for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I saw true fear in her eyes. Oliver, she whispered. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, silent. Let her sit in it. Let her feel the weight of all the damage she had done. Tears welled up in her eyes. I have nowhere else to go. Not my problem. She swallowed hard. I was stupid. I was selfish. But I love you. I never stopped loving you. I laughed. Actually laughed. It was sharp, bitter. You don't love me, Julia. You loved what I gave you. The money, the house, the stability. But love. I shook my head. You don't even know what that means. Her face crumpled, but I had no sympathy left. She reached for me. I stepped back. Oliver, please, she begged. We can fix this. You don't have to do this. I stared at her, cold, unmoved. You did this to yourself, I said simply. Now live with it. Then, without another word, I shut the door. This time for good. I stood there for a moment, listening. No pounding, no screaming, no desperate pleas, just silence. Through the peephole, I saw Julia still standing there, frozen, as if her brain refused to accept that this was really happening, that I had actually shut the door on her, that there was no coming back. She blinked, once, twice, then looked down at her hands like she didn't recognize them. The same hands that had once worn diamonds, swiped platinum credit cards, traced lies into another man's skin. Now they were empty. A small, bitter smile tugged at my lips. She finally understood. I watched as she took a shaky breath and turned, walking away from the house she had once ruled like a queen. Except now? Now she was just another fallen monarch, stripped of her power, discarded, irrelevant. She didn't look back. I waited until she was gone, until her figure disappeared into the night, then exhaled, my body finally letting go of the last piece of her. The house was quiet, not empty, not hollow, just peaceful. I walked through the rooms, running my fingers along the edges of furniture, the walls, the framed photos of Lucas that still hung where they always had. He deserved better than her. I stood in front of his picture for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stood there and let the silence settle around me, let it seep into my bones. This wasn't how I thought life would go. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't drowning. I wasn't clawing for air, trying to hold together a life built on lies and betrayal. I was free. And Julia? She was just a ghost now, a fading memory, and that was all she would ever be.